It was on a sunny Sunday afternoon that our nightmare with the HOA began. We were celebrating my grandfather's 50th birthday, and our house was full of family. The garage, the front entrance, every possible space was filled with guests' cars. The party was amazing until we found that shocking pink envelope stuck on the front door. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Fine for violating HOA rules, $350 for unauthorized parking on private property. My dad, Robert, got red with anger as he read the paper. This doesn't make sense. How can we be fined for parking in our own garage? Mom, always the voice of reason, picked up the paper. There must be some mistake, Robert. I will call Heather tomorrow to clear this up. Heather Matthews, our new HOA president. Just saying her name sent shivers down the neighborhood's spine. Ever since she took over 3 months ago after an election with very low participation, she had been turning our peaceful Maple Ridge estates into a minefield of obscure rules and absurd fines. The next morning, I watched my mom on the phone with Heather. Patricia, a respected real estate attorney for 15 years, now sounded like a student being scolded by a principal. Yes, Heather, I understand there are rules, but... No, we were not aware of that specific clause. Well, technically those are our spots. Yes, I understand. When she hung up, her expression said it all. Apparently there is a rule that limits the number of cars that can be parked on private property during events. Something about preserving the visual appeal of the neighborhood. The fine still stands. We paid the fine, although my dad complained about it for a whole month. We thought it would be an isolated incident. We did not know it was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, the most unbelievable coincidence happened. My dad came home with an expression that mixed shock and a strange satisfaction. You will not believe it. Guess whose loan request landed on my desk today? As a senior credit officer at First National Bank, my dad dealt with commercial loans every day, but this one was special. A request for $1.2 million from the HOA of Maple Ridge to build a new recreational area. And who signed the document? Heather Matthews. That means you are going to review her loan request? I asked, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Exactly. And like all loan requests, I need to carefully evaluate the organization's finances. His smile had a hint of mystery, something we rarely saw. Meanwhile, the fines kept coming. A week later, we received another notice. Violation, unapproved plants in the front garden, $275. Our violets had been planted 5 years ago, well before Heather took over. The following week. Violation, house paint color not meeting approved standard, $500. Our house had been painted the year before, with the previous board's approval. It felt like we were being specifically targeted. At the condominium meetings, Heather carried herself like a queen. Rules exist to maintain the value of our properties, she repeated with her fake smile. Fines are just incentives to follow the rules. One afternoon, coming home from school, I noticed something strange. Mr. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor, was sitting on his front step crying and holding a pink envelope. I went over to see if he was okay. $800 for not trimming your lawn according to the rules, he showed the fine with trembling hands. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. How was I supposed to mow the lawn? That night, I told my parents about the situation. My dad stayed silent for a long time. This has gone too far, he finally said. Patricia, I think we need to investigate the HOA finances more deeply. Something isn't right. My mom agreed. I've been hearing similar things from other clients living here. Mrs. Jensen got fined for having an American flag that was too big. The Thompsons were fined for leaving toys in their yard for more than 3 hours. That is when we started our investigation. My dad would bring work documents and analyze financial reports from the HOA that we managed to collect from other residents. Soon, a pattern began to emerge. The fines had increased 400% since Heather took over. And even stranger, the financial report showed vague expenses like consulting services and administrative fees that added up to nearly $50,000 in the last 3 months. We need to talk with more neighbors, my dad decided. We are not the only ones facing this. Our little family investigation soon turned into a community mission. I began noticing furtive glances from neighbors when we went to the market or walked our dog. They were not judging us but silently showing solidarity. We all felt the same squeeze under Heather Matthews' tyrannical rule. One Saturday afternoon, while I was mowing the lawn to make sure it was exactly the regulated height of 3.5 centimeters, yes, the HOA had a specific rule about that, Dr. Anderson, our 61-year-old neighbor, came over with his characteristic gardening hat. "Is your dad home, kid?" he asked, nervously looking over his shoulder as if he was afraid of being seen. Minutes later, our living room had turned into a sort of rebel headquarters. Dr. Anderson did not come alone. He brought along Mrs. Miller, a retired teacher, and Mr. Patel, the owner of the local pharmacy. Each had their own horror story about Heather. "She fined me because my trash can was on the sidewalk for more than 2 hours after collection," Mrs. Miller complained. $200 for 2 darn hours. "I received a notice for excess colorful flowers in my garden," added Mr. Patel. Apparently, more than 3 different colors of flowers in one area are visually disturbing. My dad listened carefully, taking notes on every detail. On a side table, my mom was meticulously organizing copies of fines and notices brought by the neighbors. "The pattern is clear," she concluded after an hour of analysis. "The fines are disproportionate and inconsistent. The amounts seem to be decided arbitrarily. And the rules cited rarely appear in the association's original bylaws," my dad added, flipping through a binder. "Heather is literally making up rules as she goes." The visit from those neighbors opened the floodgates. In the following days, a constant stream of frustrated residents came to our house, each bringing their own folder of injustices. Our dining table disappeared under piles of documents, improvised charts, and spreadsheets full of suspicious numbers. My dad stayed up late poring over those papers, comparing them with the HOA financial records that he had obtained through the loan request. The evidence was undeniable. About 65% of the money collected in fines was not accounted for in the official reports. "It's worse than we thought," he whispered to my mom one night, thinking I was already asleep. "She is not just being authoritarian. She is skimming money." The next morning, when I left for school, I noticed something strange on our car, a flat tire. I thought it was a coincidence until I got home and discovered that all 4 tires were punctured, each with a small cut on the side, damage that could not have happened accidentally. My dad was furious, but not surprised. "They are getting desperate," he said as he called for a tow truck. "It means we are getting closer to the truth." That same night, we received a call from Dr. Anderson. His voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Robert, someone broke into my house. My office has been ransacked. The HOA documents you gave me, they are missing." The message was clear: Heather had allies, and they were willing to cross legal boundaries to protect the scheme. The turning point came in the form of an unlikely figure. I was studying in the local library when Samantha Matthews sat down in front of me. Heather's 23-year-old daughter, a college student in business administration who still lived with her mother. We had never spoken before. "I know what you are doing," she said bluntly, staring at my notebook. "And I think you need to see this." She slid a USB drive across the table. "These are the real financial records of the HOA. My mom keeps 2 sets of books. One to show publicly, and another for, well, you will understand when you see it." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, suspicious. "She is your mom." Samantha sighed deeply, an expression of pain crossing her face. "Exactly because of that. I grew up hearing that integrity was everything. Now I see her intimidating the elderly and families, extorting money from the community. I no longer recognize the person she has become." I took the USB drive home as if I were carrying radioactive material. When my dad opened the files, his face went pale. "My God, it is worse than we thought." She skimmed almost $200,000 in 2 years. Part of it as consulting fees paid to a company called HM Enterprises. HM. Heather Matthews, my mom concluded, leaning over to examine the documents. And that is not all, my dad continued. She is using the fines to pressure certain homeowners to sell their houses below market value. Then, the properties are resold to another front company, Maple Investments LLC. That also belongs to her? I asked. Exactly. She buys them for $50,000 below value, sells at full price, and pockets the difference. All this while using the association money to finance the scheme. Armed with this evidence, my dad called for a meeting with an unexpected ally, Mr. Warren, a retired judge aged 72 who lived at the end of the street. Although he rarely participated in community events, everyone respected him for his legal knowledge. After meticulously examining our documents for 2 hours, Mr. Warren took off his reading glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. You have a solid case. This is fraud, embezzlement, abuse of fiduciary power, the list goes on. But you need more than digital documents. You need the originals. They are in the HOA office safe, explained Samantha, who had joined our secret task force. My mom is the only one with access. Not the only one, corrected Mr. Warren. According to the association's bylaws, an emergency meeting can be called if 30% of the owners request it. And during that meeting, any board member can be forced to present the financial records for immediate inspection. Heather would never agree to that, I argued. She does not need to agree, replied the judge with a slight smile. It is a legal requirement. If she refuses, she will be violating not only the association's bylaws but also state laws on transparency in non-profit organizations. The plan was set, but Heather was not going to go down without a fight. The next morning, my dad received a call from his supervisor at the bank. Robert, I got a strange call from the president of Maple Ridge HOA. She claims that you have a conflict of interest in processing her loan request and that you are using inside information for a personal vendetta. My dad explained the situation, sharing part of the evidence we had collected. His boss, impressed with the seriousness of the allegations, not only supported him but suggested putting her loan request on hold until the situation was clarified. Heather's retaliation was immediate. The next afternoon, we found another pink envelope on the door. Inside was not a fine but a disguised threat. Official notice: the Harrison family will be sued for defamation, interference with business relationships, and breach of HOA confidentiality clauses. We recommend you drop any actions against the association to avoid substantial legal and financial consequences. It was a desperate attempt to intimidate us, but it only confirmed that we were on the right track. That night, our coalition of neighbors held a secret meeting in Mrs. Miller's basement. 37 homeowners showed up, well above the 30% needed to call for an emergency meeting. Tomorrow night, my dad announced to the group, we will submit a formal request for an emergency meeting, with all the names and signatures required. The official topic will be a review of the HOA financial practices. And if she refuses, someone asked from the back of the room. She cannot, my mom replied. If she refuses, she will be directly violating the bylaws. That would give us legal grounds to demand her immediate removal. The tension was palpable as the neighbors signed the document. We were all aware of the risks. Heather had power, influence, and a blatant disregard for the rules. But we had something stronger: documented proof and a community united against injustice. The next night, in a torrential downpour that felt like a sign of an even bigger storm, the emergency meeting was held in the community hall. The attendance was impressive, almost every household in the neighborhood was represented. Heather arrived late, clearly surprised by the crowd. This is ridiculous, she protested when she saw the agenda. There is no basis to question our financial practices. All accounts are regularly audited. By whom? My dad asked as he stood up. Because according to our records, the last independent audit was 3 years ago, before your term. What followed was a meticulous presentation of the evidence we had collected, the disproportionate increase in fines, the undocumented expenses, the shell companies, the 2 sets of accounting records. Heather alternated between vehemently denying everything and trying to change the subject. When my dad mentioned HM Enterprises, her face visibly lost color. "This is defamation," she shouted, standing up. "You have no proof of any of this." Then Samantha, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room until then, stood up. "We do have proof. The original records are in the safe, Mom. The real accounting books that you've been hiding from everyone." The community hall fell into complete silence. Heather's expression switched between shock and fury as she looked at her own daughter. For a moment, I thought we would see an explosion of anger, but to everyone's surprise, she just laughed, a cold and calculated laugh. "My own daughter, manipulated by envious neighbors," she said, composing herself. "Samantha has always had a wild imagination. And as for those records that supposedly exist, the office remains locked and only I have authorized access." That is when Mr. Warren slowly stood up, leaning on his cane. Despite his age, his voice carried the authority of decades in the law. According to Section 7, Paragraph 4 of this association's bylaws, during a properly convened emergency meeting, all financial records must be available for immediate inspection. If the President refuses, it constitutes a serious breach of fiduciary duty and is grounds for her immediate removal. Mr. Warren paused deliberately before continuing. "Besides, I have here a temporary court order authorizing access to the association's records." He waved an official document. "I obtained this order this afternoon, based on the preliminary evidence presented." All color drained from Heather's face. Her strategy was falling apart before our eyes. "This is absurd," she protested, but her voice had already lost its usual confidence. "A court order based on unfounded allegations? Then prove they are unfounded," challenged my dad. "Open the safe, show us the real records, and prove us wrong." The moment of tension was broken when Samantha walked to the center of the hall. "We don't need to wait. I have the safe combination." Heather tried to stop her daughter, but 2 neighbors, ironically, the same ones who had been fined the hardest, gently blocked her way. We watched in silence as a small group, including my dad, Mr. Warren, and Samantha, headed for the HOA office in the adjacent building. The 15 minutes of waiting felt like an eternity. The rain hammered the community hall's roof, creating a dramatic soundtrack for the moment. Heather sat there with her arms crossed, refusing to speak to anyone. When the door finally opened, the expression on my dad's face said it all. He carried a stack of red folders that he carefully placed on the main table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a solemn voice, "what we have found confirms our suspicions and, unfortunately, reveals a situation even more serious than we imagined." Over the next hour, my dad and Mr. Warren presented the original documents, parallel accounting books, falsified invoices, records of deposits into personal accounts, and fictitious consulting contracts with substantial payments to shell companies. The numbers were shocking. More than $280,000 had been skimmed over 2 years, money that was meant for maintenance, improvements, and community reserves. "The math is simple," explained my dad. For every $100 collected in fines, only $35 went back to the community. The rest was funneled through various companies, all connected directly or indirectly to Heather Matthews. The system was ingeniously simple. Heather created arbitrary rules, imposed excessive fines, then skimmed most of the money. The fines had another purpose: to pressure certain homeowners into selling their houses out of desperation. Through affiliated companies, she would then buy these properties at a discount and resell them for a substantial profit. Our community wasn't just robbed, my dad concluded. It was deliberately manipulated for personal gain. The outrage in the hall was palpable. Neighbors who rarely spoke now argued furiously, sharing their stories of injustice and realizing that each incident was part of a larger scheme. In the midst of the growing chaos, Mr. Warren tapped his cane on the floor 3 times, restoring order. "In accordance with our bylaws, I propose an immediate vote of no confidence in the current president and the entire board for either action or inaction that allowed this situation to continue." The vote was swift and decisive, 87 in favor, 3 opposed, presumably members of the board. In just minutes, Heather Matthews and her circle of allies had been officially removed from their positions. As Heather stood up to leave, her dignity in shambles but her arrogance still intact, my dad interrupted her with one last remark. "By the way, Heather, First National Bank has decided to reject your HOA loan request, citing a significant financial discrepancies and evidence of mismanagement. Any future requests will require a full and independent audit, as well as a new board." The look she gave us was full of venom, filled with more spite than all the verbal threats combined. Without saying another word, she left in the downpour, alone. The real work began the next morning. An interim board was quickly formed, with Dr. Anderson taking on the temporary presidency and my mom offering free legal assistance to reorganize the association. A forensic accounting firm was hired to examine every penny collected and spent over the last 3 years. The audit results were sent directly to the district attorney. In less than a week, state investigators visited our community, collecting additional testimony and evidence. Heather faced a difficult choice: criminal charges with possible jail time, or a settlement that included full financial restitution, a permanent resignation from any homeowners association position, and a formal public admission of guilt. Practical to the end, she chose the settlement. Over the next 3 months, we witnessed a remarkable transformation in our community. The recovered funds, nearly $300,000 after the forced sale of Heather's shell companies, were redirected to long-delayed projects, a new playground, repaving of secondary streets, and improvements to the drainage system that often failed during heavy rains. More important than the physical changes was the transformation in the association structure. A new constitution was written with full participation from the residents. Among the changes: live streaming and recording of all board meetings, limits for fine amounts and a formal appeals process, an annual independent financial audit, a 2-year term limit for any board position, a 75% approval requirement for any changes to existing rules, a review committee made up of rotating residents to evaluate complaints. "We are basically creating a system of checks and balances," my mom explained during a community meeting. "No one person or small group will ever have unchecked power again." The most surprising change came from an unexpected source. During one of these meetings, Samantha Matthews asked to speak. With a trembling but determined voice, she addressed the neighbors her mother had tormented for so long. "I want to say I'm sorry for what my mom did to this community," she began. "Even though I did not take part, I waited too long to stand up. I know many of you see me as part of the problem, and I understand if you don't trust me." She paused to hold back her emotion. "But this is also my home, and I want to be part of the solution. I am graduating in business administration, and if you allow me, I would like to volunteer my time on the new financial committee." There was initial hesitation, murmurs, and wary looks. But then, Mrs. Miller, one of the people most harmed by Heather's rules, slowly stood up. "If it weren't for you, dear, we'd still be under your mother's tyranny. You deserve a chance to build something different." In an impromptu vote, the community agreed to give Samantha an opportunity. She became the assistant treasurer, helping to reorganize financial systems and implement tighter controls, using her insider knowledge to ensure no one could exploit the system again. As for Heather, she sold her house for well below market value, the money needed for her restitution, and moved to another state. Ironically, the house was bought by the Rodriguez family, the same elderly folks who had been fined for not being able to mow the lawn while Mr. Rodriguez was in the hospital. They used their retirement savings, now feeling safe to invest in a larger home in the revitalized community. 6 months after that dramatic meeting in the rain, we held our first block party. The streets were closed to cars, tables lined the main avenue, and every family brought something to share. People who used to just wave politely now chatted excitedly, exchanged recipes, and planned joint projects. Mr. Warren, our old judge-turned-community mentor, raised his glass for an impromptu toast. To the true meaning of community, he proclaimed. Not one imposed by rules and punishments, but built through mutual respect and shared purpose. I looked around and saw something I had never noticed before, genuine smiles on my neighbors' faces. Children ran freely through the gardens without worrying about outdoor activity limits. Yes, that was one of Heather's rules. Dogs were walked by their owners without fear of fines for disrupting the landscape aesthetics. But what really impressed me was the sight of more than 24 cars parked in garages and in front of houses along the street, some with up to 4 vehicles, others with trailers, and even a small boat. All parked proudly on private property, without fear of pink envelopes showing up on the doors. My dad saw the look on my face and smiled, putting an arm around my shoulder. "Funny how it all started, isn't it?" he said. "A fine for parking in our own garage. And now, it's a real community," I replied, as we watched Dr. Anderson, our new president, cheerfully helping serve dessert to the neighbors. Maple Ridge Estates had transformed. What was once just a collection of pretty houses with people living behind closed doors was now a true neighborhood, a place where people knew each other by name, helped one another, and solved problems together. The tyranny of Heather, as painful as it had been, ultimately gave us an unexpected gift. It united us against a common cause and taught us that community is not something you buy with a house, it is something you build day by day through small acts of courage, honesty, and solidarity. While I nibbled on a piece of Mrs. Miller's homemade apple pie, the same neighbor who once cried over an unfair fine, I realized I would never look at our condominium the same way again. We had faced a corrupt system and not only survived, but thrived. And all because my dad, a simple bank loan officer, refused to accept that someone could fine us for parking in our own garage. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this.